John Brierley's been a devotee of the Camino and its ability to connect people to their own spiritual journeys since the 1990s. He's a huge promoter of the Camino as a path of awakening, and he's here to share today some of his perspectives on that experience. Please welcome John Brierley.
Hello, Camino family. I love you. Because the Camino is a family. We are family. It's more than friendship, much more than friendship. We can be friends and fall out of friendships. But when we realize our connection as family, as spiritual family, there's no falling out. You can't cancel and decide you are no longer part of the family. A lot of people write to me and say that a highlight of their journeying is to realize this nature of sacred family. It's a highlight for many people. And the relationships we build along the way are often very intense and very beautiful. From my perspective, we all have the exact same spiritual DNA. We come from the same source, the same essence. We come from the same Mother, Father, God. Now, language can be very divisive, so if I use any words or terminology that doesn't resonate with you, then please choose your own. Words are but symbols of symbols, and therefore twice removed from reality. So we mustn't get stuck on terminology, because what we absolutely urgently need to find is what we have in common, not on what separates us. And we need to find this urgently. There is a wisdom teaching which I believe is at the heart of all true religion, which says that there is only love or a call for love. So when something's going on in my life and I forget the essence of who I am, and I get angry and cross, somebody just taken the last bed in the albergue, I'm possibly not terribly loving in that moment. But I do recognize, because I'm tired and cold maybe, and worried about where I might sleep, that in a way it is a call for love. And I've begun to recognize that in some of the responses I get from people who are tired or cross or sad or lonely, lost a loved one, lost their work, and they can often come out with hurtful, or what seems like hurtful comments, but it's always a call for love. Even the most heinous acts that we see around the world, underneath it all, I can't help but believe that there's a suffering there deep down that hasn't been recognized. And so the appropriate response would always be to show love. I believe that the Caminos de Santiago are one of the most potent forces in the world today for our collective healing. Now that's a very grand statement, but I believe it to be true, and I believe it to be true for a whole host of reasons, and I'll mention 3 now. This family that we have, that we are, encompasses the entire globe. There are people from every single nation on earth who have walked the Caminos in this recent modern history for over the past, say, 30 years. And last year alone, 177 different nations were represented along the Camino. That's quite average in each year. Statistics can often be very cerebral. So I just want to read out quickly about half a page of last year's list of our family. So let's just visualize our brothers and sisters, our spiritual family coming from the following countries: Brunei, Lesotho, Gambia, Kuwait, Mongolia, Ghana, Mauritius, Suriname, Azerbaijan, Malawi, Burkina Faso, Nepal, Cambodia, Iraq, Grenada, Jamaica, Greenland, Madagascar, and 3,500 Canadians. Although Wendy tells me last night she thought it was 5. And that's another interesting point, that the statistics that we have relate to those people obtaining a Compostela in Santiago. But many, many other people walk the route and don't, for a variety of reasons, require or need or want a Compostela. I myself personally could have collected certainly over 100, but I have one because I needed to photograph it to put it in the book. So not even the United Nations can match the Camino family. We are literally a worldwide organization. There is no other organization that can claim to embrace the entire planet. A second point, and I think probably one of the most important, is that the Camino embraces everyone from every religion and none. I myself have personally walked with many Christian denominations. I've walked with Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, Sikhs, and to date, one follower of the Shinto tradition, a beautiful 77-year-old brother that I met along the Via de la Plata, the only other pilgrim I met walking that route. We were on it for 40 days and 40 nights, and our friendship was, I realized, much more than friendship. We were soul brothers, and of course we've kept in touch, and he's come all the way from Tokyo to visit me. I'm sure many of us here have those experiences of that deep bond that builds. But probably the biggest group of people I have met over the years are those who profess to no religion: atheist, agnostic, apostate, humanist. But all of them have been wonderful, deep people searching for meaning in their lives. And what is so unique about the Caminos is their broad embrace. There's no broader church in the world than the Camino. I was in India last month, and this year they're holding another Kumbh Mela. 130 million people have converged on the Ganges for a pilgrimage and ritual bathing in the river. The largest gathering of humanity in one place at one time ever. But it is almost exclusively Hindu. Lourdes has a more modest number, about 10 million every year. But it is more or less exclusive to the Christian faith. Fatima draws about 5 million, but is more or less exclusively Roman Catholic. The Hajj draws 2.5 million to Mecca, but is almost exclusively Muslim. The Camino is unique, and that's a terribly important point, because religions have separated us and also, of course, joined us, but it has been a force of separation. And now, to solve the problems that we face in the world, we have to come together. We have to transcend our differences. It's now vital for us. Thirdly, I'd make a third point. The Camino is utterly eclectic in the sense of who it welcomes. It welcomes everybody from every walk of life, every color, every creed, every gender, every age. To date, the youngest pilgrim I walked with was 11 months old. I was not there because I was walking rather faster than her and her parents, so I missed her first birthday, which they were going to celebrate on the Camino. And a couple of years ago, I met Michael, who was 94. Interestingly, there's a bit of a misconception. Perhaps the majority of people who walk are people who theoretically have the time, students and retirees, senior citizens. But actually the biggest group, over half of all pilgrims who arrive in Santiago, are in the working age of 30 to 60, which I find very interesting, that people somewhere in their lives are wanting time to step out and reflect on their lives and where they're going, or perhaps where they're not going. So we have this incredible embrace, and I'd just like to see who we are here. One of the terms that I love so much in terms of an overall embrace of who we are collectively as one family. The Zen might say not two, but one of the most beautiful, I think, is the Hindu Sanskrit greeting of Namaste. When the God in me greets the God in you, in that we are one. So I'd just like to briefly ask you here, if you have walked any of the Caminos to Santiago, or if you intend to in the future, would you raise your hand and say, yes, I have? Okay, I think that's probably more or less everybody. And if you haven't or don't intend to, you will. But if we've already been on the Camino Frances or one of those other routes, we need to start, perhaps, if you want to walk again and renew your Camino vows, or you want to which many of us do, go back again, to really consider some of these alternatives. And I tell you why. There's now a very big impact, environmental and commercial, and we want to share that in a way around a wider, we want to share ourselves around the Caminos. So when you're thinking of going back, just do a little research and see what other routes. We've heard beautifully about the Primitivo this morning, but there are so many, I reckon about 20,000 kilometers away marked Caminos to Santiago. So you have plenty of choice. Orense, another beautiful route. And Orense has a tiny proportion of pilgrims starting there, which is strange to me because it's a beautiful old Roman spa town. And there are at least a dozen buses and at least a dozen rail connections every day to Orense. Whereas those of you who've started in Sarria, it's really quite difficult to get there. You have to change in Lugo, I think it is. So I'm also wanting to sort of promote it, because when people arrive coming down the Camino Frances and they reach Ponferrada, you can loop into the Camino in Vienna from Ponferrada, and then that relieves the pressure further down the road from Sarria. And the reason, I suppose, why people over the last 20, 30 years haven't walked it is because it takes about an extra 4 or 5 days, so people are on a tight schedule. So if you're on a tight schedule, change your schedule. And when I return home, I shall be going off to the Camino del Piemonte that runs from Narbonne along the flanks of the Pyrenees and goes to Lourdes. And from Lourdes, then you can either go up, join the Camino Aragonese through the Saint-Port Pass, or go straight on to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. We need to be conscious also that the Caminos do have that sacred aspect to them. They are a pilgrim route. They are about spiritual journeying. That's the definition of a pilgrimage. There are many, many hiking routes around the world. And while the Camino is a hike by all accounts, it's also that inner journeying, and we need to remember that. So if you just want a holiday rather than holy days, maybe there's other routes in the Alps, because there's a lot of pressure now, certainly on the French way. I'm going to risk a little bit here, but what's life about but taking a few risks? And I'd like to do a little ritual. I feel somehow that ritual has gone out of our lives. Our lives are so busy, we don't really have time, we have time, but we don't make time to stop and pause. There's always so many demands on our time. But ritual engages our soul muscles. It deepens our awareness into something else. One of the oldest rituals, recorded rituals we know about, is shaking a hand. It goes back about 10,000 years, hieroglyphics. The weapon hand, we open it and extend it in friendship. Now, we maybe don't expect our right hand to be our sword hand, but we might have a lot of psychological attack. So the very act of shaking somebody's hand can be an act of peace. And there's that lovely time in Mass when we extend a hand as a sign of peace. Goodbye comes from the words, God bless you. The Spanish say adios. Adios to God. So sometimes when I'm on the Camino and I've said Buen Camino 20 times and I was losing its meaning, I sometimes add Buen Camino, adios. And I get some quizzical looks, but I smile back nicely. It was Rumi who said, silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation. So I would like to light a candle. I lit it last in Le Puy, where I got the candle, the little chapel there, the chapel of Saint Michel. So we have the Archangel Saint Michael, Saint Miguel. I would have probably had an image of Santiago if they'd had one there, but Santiago's here anyway. So we'll add the Archangel along with Santiago. And when we light it, if we can somehow feel ourselves connecting, we lit it in Toronto, I'll bring it to Vancouver, and if we can see it as an act of connecting with all the pilgrims who are on the route today, there are several thousands at this very moment walking the various routes towards Santiago. And to connect also with all those who've walked it from all those countries in the world, every single country in the world, to connect with those pilgrims from those countries as well. Because then our family extends to cover the entire planet. And then later on, we hopefully get to that point where we realize that actually we are all part of one human family, so that we extend this to cover humanity as a whole.
Obviously, I don't smoke.
But don't become a smoker. Is it burning your hand?
No.
Now what I'd like to do is I'll leave it here. And before we leave, we will, before I finish, I know there'll be pressure on me because there's the coffee break. We'll blow it out collectively and visualize sending the love and the light and the blessing from this place to cover all our Camino family all around the world. We are speeding up our lives and working harder in a futile attempt to slow down and enjoy it. It's almost as if life and the business of it, and it seems to get busier every year, has thrown us out onto the surface of our lives and disconnected us from our center, from the essence of who we are, from the truth of who we are, from our own divinity. Some years ago, I was with a wonderful Buddhist monk called Thich Nhat Hanh. And he came to Findhorn to be with us, to do some mindful walking, which is one of the things that he does at his ashram. And it was wonderful walking mindfully, coming just totally present to each step. The smell of the flowers, the sound of the birds. We walked very, very slowly. And we were crossing a golf course in Scotland. I noticed that people were teeing off and they waved us on. So Thich Nhat Hanh hitches up his habit and turns to us and says, "And now we shall practice mindful jogging." He's just gone back to Vietnam to leave his body behind. He's ready to go now. He's left us some wonderful teaching, but his ashram is still there on the route from Vézelay. And some years ago, I stayed in the ashram, took teaching with him. Every day we would walk mindfully around the beautiful forests there. And then I left the ashram and walked onto the Camino and onto Santiago. It was very, very powerful to start with that silence and that mindfulness. So perhaps we might, when we're starting our own walk each day, whether it's on the Camino or wherever it might be, well, in this particular case, when we're on the Camino, to consider just pausing and making our own simple ritual. It needn't be long or complicated, but just pausing to reflect on who we are, why we're here, who we really are, and why we're really here. And with the Camino, there is a certain concern about all the interruptions that come along the way, the business that is now coming on the main Camino Frances, and that we might consider, just think about, when we're pausing to head off and have maybe an intention or an invocation for the day, to consider turning off our mobile phones while we're walking. There would be many who would like them to be turned off all the day, but I think that we might, if it became acceptable, to turn them off when we're walking between the cafes at least, or the albergues. Then you can turn it on in the Wi-Fi zones. And for those, when I've suggested that to people, very gently or just to consider it, they've often come up about, for instance, a safety issue. Well, one of the purposes of the Camino is so that we can find trust in life and that we will be protected. And for those, it's easy for me as a elderly white male, but for those of us who do have concerns, legitimate concerns, apparently you can always set your phones for an emergency call, so it's off, but one swipe and it will automatically, for instance, ring 211 or whatever you need to do. So there's no reason from a safety perspective why you could not turn off the mobiles. It's just a thought. And now I'd like to look at the Camino as a path of awakening. I went to a Christian boarding school in Dublin, and every day we were obliged to attend chapel. Actually, I always liked chapel. I was never particularly religious. And I rather liked the Bible stories. But there's one story in particular that always stuck out for me. And it's where it says, "And a great sleep came across Adam." And I did a little further study. And there's nowhere in the Bible makes any reference to Adam ever waking up. I remember discussing this with a man of the cloth I met along the Camino, and he obviously got frustrated with my questioning because he left rather hurriedly, I thought. With the words, "Adam is a long time dead." You see, he was a literalist, and I'm a Gnostic. Because I see it, that we are Adam. We are also, of course, children of God, but we're also children of Adam. And we are very fast asleep. Collectively, we need to wake up. A few years ago, or many years ago now, I had the privilege of being asked to attend some meetings from the Club of Budapest. I don't know whether any of you know about the club. Not related at all to the Budapest Pilgrim Association. It's made up of some of the greatest luminaries of our time, from all walks of life. From religious life, we have people like Bishop Desmond Tutu, the Dalai Lama. Representatives from the arts, we have people like Paulo Coelho, who gave us the pilgrimage and put many people in touch with the route. From politics, we have our Irish President, Mary Robertson, who is also Chief Commissioner for the United Nations Humanities Programs. She's also walked the Camino many times. And in the manifesto, it mentions the enormous problems facing humankind at this time. The trillions of dollars spent on the military and armaments, and only a fraction spent on the environment and socially responsible programs. And in there it says, uses the words of Einstein, "We cannot solve a problem with the same mindset that gave rise to the problem in the first place. When all is said and done, we need a more evolved consciousness. Entering the 21st century with the consciousness that hallmarked the 20th would not only be inappropriate, but dangerous." So how do we evolve our consciousness? Here's where the Camino comes back to help us. Because it takes us out of our normal comfort zone, our familiar life, and puts us in a different culture, a different time zone. I'm suffering from jet lag still. But what the Camino does very well and very legitimately, it brings us together as this Camino family with people who are also walking the route with a high intention in mind. And it gives us permission to open up and talk about the things that really matter. The big, deep questions of life. I don't know whether you know the works of Marianne Williamson, and it's often beautiful words which have often been related to the inaugural speech of Nelson Mandela, another wonderful luminary who was a member of the Club of Budapest too, while he was alive, where it says our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure. It is not the darkness that most frightens us, it's the light. And that light is in everyone, who am I? Who am I beyond the guidebook writer? Beyond the father of 2 lovely daughters? And beyond my, is it 8 billion sisters and 8 billion brothers? Who am I really? We all came with a sacred contract. And I think many of us leave this opportunity to find it and live it. I know my own father was very distressed at the end of his life, that he felt he hadn't found or lived his reason for being here. I'm sure he did, but he felt somehow that he hadn't fulfilled that. And I'm sure that's a sense that many people have. St. James, whose path we follow, had a calling and answered it faithfully, and came to Galicia, the Iberian Peninsula, to preach the message of his master, a message of unconditional love and forgiveness. And by most accounts, he was hopelessly unsuccessful. He had apparently only a handful of converts before returning to Jerusalem for his martyrdom. But the message he left somehow seeded. It took rather a long time to take hold. But we're all here this morning because of one person who lived his sacred contract and fulfilled it 2,000 years ago. So let's use the Camino to the space it gives us to find out why we came. And this is the Camino as a path of inquiry, where we ask amongst our fellow travelers, who am I? Why am I here? Why did I come at this time? And in a silence, and if we give it enough time, the answers will come. They always do. The problem is we don't give it the time. Our minds are so full of the other things that need to be doing. And that's a great gift of the Camino, if we can fall into that period of quiet and silence and not rush our schedule back home. Shakespeare was, by all accounts, a great master. And his plays give us quite a bit of an insight. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women, and they have their exits and their entrances, and each one in the time plays many parts. But what he didn't say is that actually we write our script. We're the actors, we're the directors, we're the stage managers. So it's really important we find our own way and reason and purpose to contribute it back to the world. What use is there in Friday prayers at the mosque, at the synagogue on Saturday, or church on a Sunday, if on Monday we forgot why we went in the first place. And this is where it is about bringing the Camino back home. And I realize now that I'm running in, and if you don't mind, if I'm coming back to do, we're meeting up at 3 o'clock to do some questions and answers. I'd wanted to allow some time, but I'm from Ireland. I never kissed the Blarney Stone, but I'm afraid to say it's in me. I just want to tell you one quick story, which I found very inspiring. I think I have time. Some years ago, I put on a conference, an international conference called Business for Life, with the subtitle, Reconsecrating Our Work. How to find our work as our Camino. And the image we held was that our office building was our temple, and our desk was our altar. It was Khalil Gibran who said, "My life is my temple and my religion." But I asked a man called Richard Brown to come and give a presentation. And Richard Brown he's no longer, a director of the World Bank. And one day he was going to his office, rushing to his office, drizzly day, grey. And as he got out of his car going into the office, he said, "I can't live my life anymore like this. My working life needs to have purpose in it. I can't go on this way." So he went up to his office. I think it was on the 6th floor. I always wanted to be the 7th. There's something very symbolic about 7. But I think it was the 6th. And he sat down at his desk and he sent out an email to the entire staff of the World Bank, an internal memo, and said, if anybody was interested in looking at how their work life in the bank could be part of their development and have greater meaning, he'd reserved a room on the 1st floor for 6 o'clock. The bank closed at 5:30 or something. Well, he went down 6 o'clock, and when the lift doors opened, he thought there'd been a fire or something. It was completely jam-packed. They had to find the janitor and open up the assembly hall. And that night, 300 people piled in and founded the World Bank Spiritual Unfoldment Society. You see, if we have the courage to put out a message of love, we're all so hungry. So let's have the courage to live our deep spiritual selves. Let's own our divine nature. Let's own the essence of who we are and have the courage to put that out there and see what might happen. If it can happen in the World Bank, it can happen anywhere. Now, what I'd like to do is to go down, and if we can collectively blow the candle and send this love and energy and blessing out to the world and out to our fellow Caminoites all around the world.